Hi, welcome to this lecture on chapters 26, 27, and 28 of your textbook, The Norton Field Guide to Writing. What I am going to be doing is covering some information with you in order to prepare you for the process of editing your draft and submitting your final copy of your research paper. If you printed out these notes, you can have them with you and view them as we're going through the tutorial together. If you'll give me just a minute, I'm going to actually go through the process of sharing my screen with you in this video so that I can have an opportunity to highlight some things with you as we go along. All right, let me see, forgive me as I kind of fumble through this, still learning to figure out Zoom. No, okay. All right, I was going to try to have my little highlighter handy, but it's not working for me. Okay, let's talk about assessing your own writing. Okay, if we're going to talk about assessing what you write for yourself and for others, one measure of success is the length that you're able to write. So remember, the required length of the paper is at least 1,500 words. If you've followed the process of the outline and included the information that you should be including from your secondary sources, I suspect you have met this requirement. But keep that in mind that sometimes more is better than less. If you're interested in looking at your writing and making sure that that your essay possesses all of the things that it should, it would be very helpful to print out a copy of your paper so that you could highlight useful patterns in different colors. If you want to simply see if you have the basic structure of the essay, you could highlight topic sentences in blue and transition sentences in yellow and claim statements in orange. This is a really nice way to visually see what you see on your paper and whether or not you are missing things. So again, it's a very time-consuming step of the process, but it is a very beneficial one because once you're finished, you can lay all your papers out in front of you and you'll be able to see from a color standpoint what you might be missing. So keep that in mind. You can assess the writing you do for others, which is what we're doing through the peer editing process. And you can consider the rhetorical situation, such as purpose, audience, genre, stance, and design. When you are examining the text itself, and I'm talking about your paper, keep these things in mind. What is your thesis? By now you know what your thesis is. You've written a draft of your paper. Is your thesis narrow or broad enough? Now is the time that you could fix that and change it. Does the beginning focus on what you wanted to say? Pay particular attention to the narration section of the paper where you are essentially giving us a broad overview of the topic, the problem, you're situating your thesis in the problem itself. Have you done that adequately? That's an important part of your paper where that draws the reader in. So we need to see that. And does the ending say what you want to say? Again, the conclusion is a really important part of your paper, but it's often a part that people get confused about exactly what to write. Go back to what you said in the beginning. Can you take us back to the beginning without exactly saying the same thing? You can call your readers to take action, to stand up and fight for a solution to the problem. There are lots of ways to conclude the paper, and your textbook elaborates on a lot of those. Consider the support that you provide in your argument. This is really important. What reasons and evidence have you given to support your argument? You should have at least 3 argument paragraphs, and within each one, you've got claim statements and evidence and interpretation of those statements. Do you have any key terms and concepts that you need to define? And are there places where you need more description? Remember, only 10 to 15% of the paper should be the voices of other people. That means the majority of the paper is your voice. So are we hearing that? I will say, as a just general comment across the board, that the place where I usually don't see enough of students' voices is when they're making that claim statement and when they're providing that interpretation. Those are your two places where you really have an opportunity to say a lot about your topic. Do you make any comparisons? Is that necessary? You know, if you're talking about a specific problem, can you compare it to something else? And if you include narrative, is it relevant? Consider the organization and check for clarity. Again, you've turned in an outline. You're going to your paper and possibly color coding it with highlighters. You know, have you got a good structure to your paper? If you follow the sample outline, chances are you do. Do you have proper transitions from one idea to the next? That's really important. Again, if you've done your outline, chances are you have done that, but that doesn't mean that there's not a better place or a better way for you to do that. This might be a good moment for me to slip in this idea. Remember, you are going to be graded on the final paper. It's on the rubric. You know, did you properly introduce the author, the source, his or her credibility, a 1 or 2 sentence summary of the source and the conclusion that that author makes before you ever go into using the evidence the very first time? That's so important. And when we're talking about these transitions, that's a good place to think about that. Check for clarity in your title. Do you have a creative title? It needs to be. Titles are important. They draw us in. Is your thesis clear? Is the beginning, body, ending, transitions, all of that? You're not required to have visuals, but is all of that clear in your paper? And please check for your grammar, your punctuation, and your sentence mechanics. That is so important. Let me start by saying, too, that if you read your paper aloud, print it off and sit at a table and read it out loud. That is a wonderful way to edit your paper, and it's very beneficial. It is one of the ways that I usually catch most of the mistakes that I make when I'm writing. Now, you've already edited somebody else's paper. Hopefully your peer editor was able to help you with the things listed here on the screen as far as the title, the introduction, the thesis, the support, and the ending of your paper. That's something I hope that you and I will talk about as well, or have already talked about in your conference. Please make sure you give yourself time to revise. Again, I've said this in the overview. Don't overlook this process. This is where real writing happens because you've been away from the paper for a while. So now you can come back and actually write something more than what you wrote before because you have a clearer head. So please don't waste time. Revise. We revise to sharpen our focus. And again, you're seeing places where you might have holes or places that need more elaboration. We revise to strengthen the argument, you know, especially those claim statements. Have you really used your voice and thoroughly explained something before you actually go into the evidence from another source? Can you improve your organization? You know, I remember looking at papers a couple of semesters ago and seeing things that were down in the refutation section that really could have been better served somewhere else. So now is the time to consider whether or not you need to move something around. Have you clearly said what you want to say? This is when revision of sentences and sentence structure happens. Again, a good way to do that is by reading. Read, reread, and reread. You know, we never have a first draft to a paper as a final draft. Good papers go through multiple drafts. These are just some ideas how you could rewrite your draft. Obviously, I think some of these are more beneficial if you were to have more time, such as rewriting your draft from a different point of view, rewriting it as if you had a different audience, rewriting it in a different tone of voice, rewriting it in a completely different genre. completely. Make it into a dialogue. Those are things to consider later down the road if you find yourself writing another paper with more time than we have in just this semester course. Other ways, you can take another position. You could write it as a story. You could rewrite the draft as a letter, to a hostile reader. You could rewrite it as an angry letter, taking the most extreme side possible. You could write an analysis of the topic of your argument. Again, these would be really fun to pick one and see what we came up with, but unfortunately, we don't have that kind of time in this course. So you can just file these away for later down the road. Now, when you think about editing and proofreading, let's talk about some different strategies. Again, this is the third time this has come up. Express yourself in clear and concise language. Prospective employers do not like resumes that have spelling and grammar errors. So if you wonder why writing this research paper is important, you might not become a newspaper editor or a children's author or any of those things, but you will be filling out job applications and you will be performing in the job world, and grammar and punctuation errors are frowned upon greatly. So learn to edit and to be careful. It is so important. Pay attention to your paragraphs, your sentences, your words, your punctuation. You want to be as clear as possible. And again, let me suggest, print it out, read it aloud, make your notes in the margins, and then go back to your computer and make changes. Research has been done on the way we actually read on a computer screen, and it is quite ineffective. Most research shows that we tend to read the first sentence, skip half of the line to the middle of the line, and then conclude with the concluding sentence of that paragraph. So really what we're doing is we're skimming, and you don't want to edit a draft by skimming, which is why I keep harping on print out a copy. When you look at your paragraphs, please pay attention to the focus of the paragraph. Do you have a topic sentence? Do you have transition sentences? Do you have claim statements, evidence, and interpretation? You're being graded on all of this in the final paper. Does every sentence relate to the main point of the paragraph? If not, it needs to be either revised or removed. Is there enough detail that develops that main point? Again, I keep harping on your voice. Can I hear your voice in the paper more than I hear the voices of your sources? Where have you placed the most important information? Is your strongest argumentative point last, or did you decide to make it first? It's really up to you. Are there any paragraphs that are long or short? Really kind of the way you've developed your outline, your paragraphs ought to be ultimately, for the most part, equal. Do your paragraphs transition from one idea to the next? And does the first paragraph catch our attention? Have you written the best introduction that you can? Now that you have written a draft of your paper, you know what you want to say, you've gotten to the end, you're in a much better place to go and revise that introduction. Draw us in, make it powerful. That's what you want to do. And does the final paragraph do the same thing? Again, how are you choosing to end the paper? Are you calling us to action? Whatever you do, don't introduce new evidence. What do you want to say? Don't say the same thing. Make it fresh, make it new. But again, leave us satisfied. When you look at your sentences, again, hopefully reading your paper aloud, is each sentence complete? Does it begin with a capital letter? Does it end with the correct punctuation? Are most of your sentences written in active voice rather than passive voice? That would mean that you're not using be verbs, you are actually using action verbs. Are your sentences parallel? Have you, used nouns, verbs, clauses? Have you stayed in the same verb tense? Have you varied your sentences? And please, have you used commas correctly? I'll go ahead and throw in right here about your citations. There is no comma or punctuation between the last name and the page number in a citation. Please review comma rules. Remember, the period goes after the citation, not within the quotes or before the citation. Have you used words and used them correctly? Please don't just use the synonym finder and insert a word and think that you're using it correctly. Have you been too vague or too general in anything you've said that needs clarification? Have you used the proper tone in your writing? Do all of your pronouns have the proper antecedents? If you have said people should look out for their concerns, a person should look out for his or her concerns, please make sure your pronouns and antecedents agree. And whatever you do, avoid cliches. You don't want them, okay? Does your language refer to others as stereotypical groups? This is important in a topic or a paper such as this. Have you used sexist language? Again, do you have sentences that use be or do verbs? If so, change them to action verbs. Have you used its and its correctly? That's a common mistake. Same as you and your or there and their. Actually, we aren't even supposed to have you and your in a paper like this. Which takes me back to the last point. Please make sure you do not use personal pronouns, and please don't use second person pronouns. You don't want to have that in your paper. When you're thinking about the final stage of the writing process, check for the appearance of your paper. Do you have a proper heading? Do you have a good title? Do you have page numbers? Is it double spaced? Have you quoted properly? Remember, if you have a lot of errors, it makes your reader question your credibility. What you put on the paper says everything about you as the writer. So slow down, read carefully, look for every punctuation mark. Again, grammar and spell checkers are helpful, but they're not perfect. This also gives you the suggestion of, as you're reading aloud, put a ruler underneath the line and move your ruler down so you know you're not skipping anything. Read the text one sentence at a time. Read the text out loud, then let somebody else read it. If you can't print it out, make corrections as neatly as possible in pen, and that doesn't really apply to us since this is an online class. So these are just, again, lots of different suggestions to help you as you think about this process of this final draft. I'm looking forward to what you've done. This is a huge component of your grade. It's 35% of your average. You've spent the majority of the semester working on it, so that's why it carries so much weight. I look forward to seeing what you come up with. Let me know if you have any questions, and please don't shrug off the editing process. This is where the real writing happens. Good luck.